My wife said she was going to her friend's house. That's what she told me, with a casual smile, as she grabbed her car keys and walked out the door. There was nothing strange in his voice, no hesitation, no clue that would make me suspicious. But something inside me, an uncomfortable feeling, an inexplicable restlessness, made me follow her that night. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was that slight change in routine, that extra touch of perfume, that sparkle in the eyes that I hadn't seen in a while, but that, now, I knew wasn't for me. I followed her at a safe distance, keeping the headlights off as I watched her car glide through the streets. She didn't take the usual route to her friend's house. My chest tightened. I sped up a little more, being careful not to be seen. When she parked in front of an unfamiliar building, my heart was beating so hard I could hear the deafening sound in the silence of the car. She went downstairs, fixed her hair, checked her appearance through the reflection of the glass, and then he appeared. A man. A stranger. He was waiting for her at the door of the building, and when she approached, he wrapped his arms around her as if he owned her. The world around me lost its sound. The scene before my eyes seemed to move in slow motion. The kiss they exchanged burned my vision, boiled my blood. It wasn't a simple kiss, it wasn't a mistake, a slip, it was intimacy, it was custom, it was something that had been happening long enough for her not to hesitate, not to look around, not to worry about what she left behind. I wanted to explode. I wanted to get out of the car, scream her name, tear her away, demand answers, ask for explanations, but no. Not that night. I came home with a plan, and my plan was simple. I wasn't just going to walk out of her life. I wouldn't give her the relief of a silent separation. I would make our divorce something unforgettable. Something she could never erase from her memory. For days I pretended I didn't know. I came home as usual, had dinner with him, kissed his forehead before going to sleep. I hated every second of it, but I knew it would be worth it. She still looked me in the eyes, still smiled as if nothing was happening. How was it possible? How could someone live such a blatant lie and not carry a hint of guilt in their eyes? And then, little by little, I began to observe better. I noticed the times she left, the moments she hit her cell phone, the small slips that previously went unnoticed. One night, while she was sleeping, I took her cell phone and scrolled through her messages. Each one was a stab. Every, "I miss you," every, "I can't wait to have you again," every promise whispered between hastily typed words. But what made me smile, for the first time, was the last message she received from him: "I can't wait to have you all to myself." That was it. She believed that she would have a new beginning, that she would start her life over with him, that, when I found out, she would simply accept it and make things easier for her. Let it be just a signed document, a change of status, a page turned. But no. Not as easily as she wanted. The day I decided to expose everything, I chose a moment she would never forget. I waited until we were surrounded by friends, family, people who had always admired us as a couple. She smiled, without even imagining what was coming. And then, when everyone was gathered, I raised my glass and announced, "Today is a very special day, a day I will never forget. And I want to share some great news with all of you." She looked at me, confused, perhaps expecting some romantic surprise, some unexpected gesture of love. But as I spoke, as I revealed every detail, the smile faded. I saw the panic grow in his eyes, the shame take over his face. The surrounding gazes turned to her, some in shock, some in disgust, some in disappointment. She tried to say something, tried to deny it, tried to explain herself, but I didn't give her space. I had already waited too long, I had swallowed my pain in silence for days. And there, in front of everyone, I ended the announcement with something that completely destroyed her: "And so that you have a wonderful future with your lover, I have already taken care of everything. Your name is no longer on the joint bank account. Your car. It's in my name. The house where you live. It was mine before we got married. You have absolutely nothing. I hope he really wants to be with you now. Silence. Her world collapsed there, in front of everyone. The lover, who before seemed so in love, now avoided looking at her. Her friends, who had always praised her, were now moving away. Her family, who had always supported her, now saw who she really was. And me? I finally felt free. But that was just the beginning. Because her true karma was yet to come. The next day brought something that not even I expected. And when it finally happened, I realized that her betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to me. Now, it just remains to be seen how far this fall would lead. Welcome to the channel where betrayal will never be romanticized, nor justified. Here, the stories are fictional, but the lesson is real. Infidelity destroys lives, erodes trust and leaves irreparable scars. Each narrative is a reminder that every choice has consequences, and some of them are devastating. Now, get ready. The story you will hear is intense, full of twists and turns and with an ending that will surprise you. Take a deep breath, and let the naked truth about betrayal begin. Lucas and Emily were what many would call the perfect couple. Together for more than 10 years, they built a solid life based on respect, friendship and complicity. He, a man dedicated to his work, meticulous and determined, always ensured that his family lacked nothing. He woke up early, followed his routine with discipline and returned home with the certainty that he was doing everything right. Emily, on the other hand, always had a light spirit, a sweet woman, with a charming presence, who made any environment more welcoming. At the beginning of their marriage, she was the center of Lucas's life, and he made a point of reminding her of that every day. The house they lived in was a reflection of what they had built together. It wasn't luxurious, but it had history in every corner. The sofa in the living room, where they spent countless nights watching movies cuddled up, the bedroom lit by soft lights, decorated with paintings chosen with care by her, and the kitchen, where Lucas occasionally surprised her with a special breakfast. For him, every detail mattered. The simple act of leaving a note next to the bathroom mirror in the morning or sending a message in the middle of the day saying she missed you were genuine ways of reminding Emily how essential she was. The marriage, however, had changed over time. Spontaneous laughter became rarer, long kisses were reduced to hurried pecks before work and deep conversations were replaced by predictable routines. Lucas noticed that something wasn't the same as before, but he always attributed it to the natural wear and tear of time, the weight of responsibilities, the tiredness of busy weeks. I tried to compensate with unexpected gifts, planning dinners for two or reserving weekends for short trips. Emily always smiled, thanked him, but something about her seemed distant, a shadow in her eyes that he pretended not to notice. At work, Lucas stood out. A methodical professional, respected by everyone, always organized and efficient. He was the type of man that his colleagues admired and that his bosses trusted. His routine was stable, without surprises, without deviations. He liked that predictability. Meanwhile, Emily spent her days involved in personal projects. She never stopped working, but she always had greater flexibility, which allowed her to have a more dynamic social circle. I liked going out with friends, attending events, meeting new people. Lucas never bothered with this, on the contrary, he thought it was good that she had a space of her own, that she didn't feel trapped in a marriage where he often needed to dedicate himself intensely to work. Friday nights, previously marked by lively dinners, were being replaced by appointments with friends. At first, he didn't see a problem. She said she needed time to herself, and he understood. But, over time, he noticed that these nights became more and more frequent. Emily arrived late, sometimes early in the morning, always smiling, and even though he felt something restless inside him, he didn't want to be that kind of controlling husband, so he kept quiet. After all, he trusted her. But it was impossible not to notice the changes. Her cell phone, which used to be thrown around the house, was now always in her possession. The sparkle in her eyes when she read certain messages. The evasive answers when he asked where he had gone. Small changes in the way you speak, the way you touch him, the way you look at him. But he refused to believe that this could be something more serious. Because thinking about that would mean confronting the possibility that everything he built was about to fall apart. Deep down, Lucas still saw Emily as the same woman he chose to be his wife. He wanted to believe that that phase would pass, that it was just a moment of restlessness, that maybe he needed to try harder to rekindle the flame between them. So he planned a special weekend, just the two of them. A place away from routine, where they could reconnect. Emily accepted, but without the excitement he expected. It was a pleasant trip, but there was something missing. He watched her, tried to decipher her, but he could no longer reach her. Little by little, the discomfort grew within him. He started paying more attention to details. The absence of her perfume on the sheets, the lost look as he talked about the day, the rush to leave, always with a different excuse. And then, one day, without planning, without thinking much, he followed Emily when she left saying she was going to meet her friends. And it was there, that night, that everything started to make sense. But Lucas was not an impulsive man. It wouldn't explode, it wouldn't cause a scandal. Not yet. He needed time. Time to understand, time to decide. Because if there was one thing he had learned throughout his life, it was that some truths needed to be exposed in the right way. And he would do it in the most unforgettable way possible. The restlessness inside Lucas became unbearable. He tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself that it was all paranoia, that he was seeing signs where there were none, but his body betrayed his mind. His heart raced when he saw Emily leave, his thoughts became confused when she said she would be back late, and insomnia consumed him when he lay in the empty bed, smelling a perfume that was no longer for him. Her silence screamed. The absence of explanations became louder than any justification. He tried to act like everything was normal. He spent his days maintaining his routine, leaving for work and returning with his usual tired expression, but within him something had already been decided. He needed to know. He needed to see it with his own eyes. Emily said she was going to meet her friends, like she had been doing lately. He smiled, said he hoped she had fun, and watched her walk out the door like nothing was wrong. But, at that moment, he decided that he would no longer stand still. He took the car keys and followed his instincts. The path did not lead to the known address. She wasn't driving towards her friend's house, but towards an area where he rarely went, a discreet neighborhood, with quiet streets that weren't very busy. The traffic was light and he kept a safe distance, following every turn she made, sweat starting to form on the back of his neck. She tried to take a deep breath, calm down, think that it could just be a coincidence, that maybe she was taking a shortcut, but then she parked in front of an inconspicuous building, away from the center, and turned off the car. Lucas felt a tightness in his chest. She got out, fixed her hair in the rearview mirror, quickly checked her cell phone and got out of the car with a smile he hadn't seen in a long time. But that smile wasn't for him. It was for the man who appeared at the entrance of the building, waiting for her. Tall, well-dressed, confident. Lucas felt his body stiffen when he saw the way he received her, the hands that touched her waist without hesitation, the eyes that sparkled when he saw her. And then came the kiss. It wasn't an uncertain kiss, it wasn't a hesitant kiss. It was a kiss from someone who had been doing this long enough to not feel guilty, from someone who allowed themselves to be desired and wanted it back. Time stopped. Lucas couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. He just watched. His stomach churned, his mind refused to accept what was before his eyes, but there was no other explanation. He felt ridiculous. All the moments of doubt you tried to bury, all the conversations you avoided, all the nights you convinced yourself you were overreacting. Everything was falling apart now, brutally and irreversibly. He didn't get out of the car. There was no scandal. He didn't run to them demanding answers, because at that moment, he didn't need words. He already knew everything. He already had all the answers he needed. The couple entered the building and the door closed behind them. Lucas stayed there for a few more minutes, standing still, looking at that building as if it were a portal to a reality he never wanted to know. It wasn't just the betrayal itself, it was what it meant. It was the fact that everything he built, everything he believed, was a lie. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. His entire body shook, a mixture of anger, disgust and pain that consumed him from the inside. He wanted to scream, he wanted to break something, he wanted to confront them right then and there, but then he realized something that made his anger turn into something deeper. Betrayal was just a part of what was happening. There was something bigger, something he didn't yet know. And that he would make a point of finding out. Lucas spent days controlling himself, suppressing the anger that was bubbling inside him, waiting for the right moment. He would not act impulsively. The betrayal was an undeniable fact, but what bothered him more than anything was the coldness with which Emily carried on with her life as if nothing was happening. He observed every detail, every fake smile, every automatic kiss she gave him before leaving. The way she still pretended to be concerned, asked about work, sat at the table as if she wasn't carrying a lie on her shoulders. It consumed him. He knew he couldn't just confront her without something more. He wanted answers. I wanted to see how far she would take that charade. Then, he began to prepare. Gathered evidence. Took photos. Saved messages. He collected each piece of truth like a puzzle that, when put together, would reveal Emily's true character. The goal was not just to expose her, but to make sure she felt the weight of the consequences. On the appointed day, Lucas arrived home earlier than usual. The clock ticked late afternoon, and he knew Emily would be there soon. He sat on the sofa, looking at his cell phone on the table, feeling his breathing heavy. When the door opened, he remained still, just watching her enter as if nothing was wrong. Emily smiled, left her bag on the sideboard and went to him, as she always did. But something about her was different. Maybe it was the slight hesitation in his gaze or the quick way he looked away. He stared at her, expressionless. She frowned, confused. Then, he took out his cell phone and swiped the screen to the first image. He turned the device towards her, without saying anything. The silence in the room became unbearable. Emily's eyes widened, her lips parting slightly, but finding no words. The photos spoke for themselves. The kiss. Hands intertwined. The look Lucas hadn't seen from her in years. Her breathing became erratic, her hands shook as she held her cell phone. Lucas didn't look away, waiting. She tried to speak, tried to stammer something that could justify the unjustifiable, but he raised a hand, silencing her before she even tried. The time for empty explanations had already passed. But what she didn't know, was that this was just the beginning. He stood up slowly, maintaining a firm posture, his eyes fixed on hers. She took a step back, her face losing color. And then, Lucas took an envelope from his pocket and threw it on the table. Emily took a few seconds before picking it up, her hands shaking as she opened the paper. Her eyes scanned the first few lines and, as the words made sense, despair began to take over her. Lucas's voice came cold, controlled, but charged with something deeper than anger. That apartment where she was with her lover? It was in your name. He knew from the first moment. Bank transactions. Monitored. The lame excuses. Documented. Every lie, every exit, every touch of another man, he knew everything. But the final blow came when he took out the second envelope and opened it in front of her. Emily felt the floor disappear. Resignation. Lucas had acted before her. Her reputation was destroyed. His boss, who had always admired his professional conduct, had received all the evidence of his disloyalty, and not just as a wife, but as a professional. The company's image was paramount, and such a public betrayal, such a dishonorable exposure, was something that no one wanted associated with the company's name. Emily brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. She tried to get closer, to hold him, but Lucas backed away. Her knees went weak. She tried to argue, tried to say that she still loved him, that it was a mistake, that she didn't know how things had gotten to that point. But he didn't believe a word of it. He didn't need to hear it anymore. Emily felt the weight of everything come crashing down on her as she realized she now had nothing. Not even a job. Not even money. Not even a house. Neither does Lucas. And, worst of all, not even her lover, who, upon realizing that she no longer had stability, didn't hesitate to disappear. Lucas watched as she broke down before him, tears flowing, despair overflowing. But he didn't feel sorry. Just relief. He turned and left. Without looking back. Lucas left the house without looking back, but his mind was still racing. The weight of what had just happened was not so simple to dismiss. The image of Emily breaking down, her choked voice begging for a second chance, her trembling hands holding the papers that sealed the destiny she created, all of this echoed in his head, but not as a doubt, but as confirmation that he had done exactly what needed to be done. But, despite the momentary relief, I knew it wouldn't end there. He walked leisurely to his car, feeling the cool night air against his warm skin. He opened the door and sat down on the bench, his hands still clenched into fists, his knuckles pale. He took a deep breath and started the engine, but didn't drive immediately. He just stood there, looking at the street, allowing his mind to process everything that had collapsed in that room minutes ago. Emily was destroyed, but that wasn't enough. He wanted to understand what led her to do this. He wanted to see something beyond the betrayal itself, something that justified it, not in the sense of forgiving, but of understanding where everything started to fall apart. She took out her cell phone and, without hesitation, opened the folder where she had stored all the messages she had exchanged with her lover. He read every word, every sentence that carried a piece of a lie that lasted too long. The confessions, the secret meetings, the promises she made to each other while lying next to him at night. His jaw clenched, he felt the muscles in the back of his neck tense. There was one thing that still needed to be done. He decided he wouldn't go home that night. He picked up the phone and made the only call that made sense. The person on the other end answered after the second ring, and Lucas wasted no time. He needed a date, now. The car continued through the city, and in less than 15 minutes, it parked in front of a not very busy cafe. He entered and didn't need to look, the man was already there, waiting for him. The lover. The man who was a ghost at your wedding for months. The one responsible for the look Emily had when she thought he didn't notice. Lucas approached, pulled out the chair and sat down without ceremony, without a smile, without any formality. The other crossed his arms, tense, clearly not expecting the night to end with that encounter. Lucas didn't blink. His gaze pierced the figure in front of him, trying to see what it was about him that made Emily move away from the man who had been by her side for more than a decade. And then, the silence broke. Do you love her? The question caught the other by surprise. He hesitated, scratched the back of his head, looked away for a moment before letting out a nervous laugh. Does it matter? Lucas leaned forward slightly, his voice coming out firm, without wavering. For you, maybe not. For me, yes. Because I've spent the last few months trying to understand how a solid marriage became this. How a woman who said she loved me was able to lead a double life without hesitation. The lover sighed, running his hands over his face, looking uncomfortable. Look, I didn't expect this to go far. I don't know what she told you, but, she didn't tell me anything. Lucas interrupted, his voice carrying something sharp, cutting. But I know everything. The silence that followed was heavy. The other fiddled with the untouched cup of coffee in front of him, as if seeking a distraction. Then, without looking up, he finally responded. No. I don't love her. Lucas felt something sink into his stomach, as if a blade was cutting him from the inside. Even though I was already expecting this response, hearing the words spoken out loud made the pain of betrayal pulse even stronger. Emily risked everything, and for someone who never planned to be by her side. She thought you had a future. Lucas continued, crossing his arms. The lover let out a humorless laugh, shaking his head. She wanted to believe that. But it was never about the future, was it? I think deep down she knew it would end like this. She clung to me because she needed something to take her away from her reality. But if you must know, she was always talking about you. Lucas narrowed his eyes, feeling a tightness in his chest. Were you talking about me? The other nodded, finally looking at him. And you know what was weirdest? She spoke with affection. As if he admired you, as if he still wanted you in some way. It was bizarre. I always thought that if someone cheats, it's because they no longer feel anything for their partner. But that wasn't it. Lucas stayed quiet, letting the words echo in his mind. He didn't know if it made him feel better or worse. The lover moved in his chair, uneasy. I know there's no point saying this now, but it was a mistake. I wouldn't have started this if I knew it was going to end like this. Lucas stood still, watching the man before him, feeling a mix of emotions he couldn't name. He didn't want anything else from there. I didn't need to hear any more excuses, any more empty justifications. He already had everything he needed to know. He got up, pushed back his chair and threw some bills on the table. I hope you're prepared. The other frowned. Ready for what? Lucas gave him one last look, one that carried something that the other didn't understand right away, but that he would soon understand. For what comes next? And then, without waiting for a response, he left the cafe, leaving the man behind, lost between relief and fear. Lucas knew that, for Emily, this was just the beginning of true hell. She had lost everything, and soon, he who thought he had escaped unscathed would discover that betrayal never comes without consequences. Lucas left the cafe without looking back, but he carried a different weight than when he entered. It was no longer anger, nor indignation. It was something deeper, a feeling of emptiness that spread throughout his body, as if he finally understood the true extent of what had happened. He already had the confirmation of what he needed. There was no love, there were no future plans. Emily risked everything for something that was never real, for a man she never intended to stay. And now she was alone, broken, without ground. He should feel some satisfaction in this, he should feel vindicated, but all that was left was an overwhelming exhaustion. The betrayal wasn't just a breach of trust, it was a complete annihilation of the history they'd built, a brutal rupture of something he once believed to be unbreakable. He got in the car and drove without a defined destination. The streets passed around him in blurs, the traffic lights changed color without him really noticing. The city he knew so well now looked different. Not because he had changed, but because he was no longer the same. When he finally parked, he realized he was in front of the house where he spent so many moments with Emily. The house that, until a few days ago, was a home. Now, all he saw was an empty structure, a place where the walls held memories he wanted to forget. He took a deep breath before getting out of the car. He knew he had to go in, collect some things, face that space one last time before deciding where he would go. When he opened the door, the silence in the house hit him like a blow. Everything looked exactly the same, but nothing was the same anymore. The photos on the shelves seemed to mock him, images of a past that now seemed like an illusion. Emily's scent still permeated the air, mixed with the perfume that he once found comforting but now only repulsed him. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing in the empty hallway. He opened the closet, took out some clothes and a small suitcase, without worrying about taking too much. He didn't want anything from there. Nothing that reminded him of her. That's when he heard the door open downstairs. The sound was hesitant, cautious. He knew who he was before he even turned around. Emily was there, standing in the middle of the room, her eyes red and her face swollen from crying. She looked different, dejected, her shoulders hunched as if she were carrying a weight she couldn't support. When he saw Lucas, his breath hitched for a moment. He didn't say anything. He just watched her, waiting to see what she had to say. She took a hesitant step forward, holding something in her hands, a crumpled envelope that trembled slightly between her fingers. His voice was weak, almost inaudible. "I don't know how to fix this." Lucas crossed his arms, remaining impassive. "It can't be fixed, Emily." She swallowed hard, closed her eyes for a moment as if she wanted to find the strength to continue. "I know. I know what I did was unforgivable. I know I destroyed everything, I know I threw away something that should never have been thrown away. But I need you to know that none of this was because I wanted to hurt you." Lucas let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Do you think it makes a difference?" Emily trembled, clutching the envelope tighter. "I'm not trying to justify it. I just wanted you to know that even when everything happened, you never stopped being the most important person in my life. I lost myself, Lucas. I lost myself and I didn't know how to get back." He shook his head slowly in disbelief. "You didn't lose yourself, Emily. You made choices. Conscious choices, over and over again. You chose to lie. You chose to deceive. You chose to destroy everything we had. Don't try to turn this into something out of your control, because it was always in your hands." She blinked rapidly, holding back tears. His look was one of pure despair, but Lucas no longer felt compassion. "I was a coward." His voice broke, almost a whisper. "I knew I was wrong, I knew I shouldn't have done any of this. But I kept going. I kept going because it was easier to run away than to face what was wrong inside me. You were never the problem, Lucas. The problem was always me." He didn't respond immediately. There was a raw truth in her words, an admission he never expected to hear. But that didn't change anything. "So you admit that you destroyed everything for nothing?" Emily hesitated before nodding. Lucas felt something sink inside him, a last trace of the pain dissipating. He didn't need any more explanations. "I didn't need anything else." Emily stepped forward, holding the envelope in front of him. "I wanted to give you this before you left." He took the paper, opened it slowly and found a handwritten letter. It was a farewell. Not an attempt at reconciliation, but a confession. She told her everything she felt, everything that went through her mind as she destroyed her marriage, everything she wished she had said before it was too late. But Lucas didn't need to read that. He folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. "It doesn't matter anymore, Emily." She closed her eyes, holding back a sob. He picked up his suitcase and walked to the door. He stopped for a moment before leaving, but didn't look back. "Take care." And then, he left. Emily stood in the middle of the room, listening to the sound of his footsteps moving away. She knew she would never have another chance. I knew Lucas would never return. And now, all that was left was silence. Lucas walked to the car without hesitation. The suitcase weighed less than the sense of completion he carried within him. He no longer felt anger, nor complete relief, just a strange calm he hadn't expected to have. He opened the car door and threw his suitcase on the passenger seat before letting out a long sigh. That was it. There was no turning back, there was nothing more to be said. Emily was behind that door, in the same place where she destroyed everything, now reduced to a void of her own creation. He gripped the steering wheel for a moment, looking at the street in front of him. There was somewhere to go, but for the first time in years, he didn't know exactly where he wanted to be. The phone vibrated on the car dashboard, and he looked at the screen without much interest. An old friend's name appeared. He thought about ignoring it, but something inside him made him answer. The voice on the other end was familiar, but it carried a cautious tone. He asked how Lucas was, if he needed anything, if he wanted to talk. For a moment, he almost hung up, tired of explanations, but something inside him wanted to hear a voice that wasn't involved in the disaster of his life. He responded with a weak, dry laugh, saying he was free, free at last. The friend didn't laugh back. There was a long pause before he asked where Lucas was going now. Lucas looked at the dashboard, at the dark street in front of him, at the city lights in the background. He didn't know. The friend suggested a bar, a place where they could talk without him having to drown in his own thoughts. Lucas hesitated. He was never one to seek solace in drinks, but deep down, he knew he didn't want to be alone that night. Agreed. The journey was silent. He drove with an empty mind, without reflecting on what had just happened, without reliving the cutting dialogue, Emily's expressions, her eyes begging for something he could no longer give. He just drove. When he arrived at the agreed location, he found his friend already sitting at a table away, a half-full glass in front of him. Lucas sat down, accepting the drink that was pushed towards him. There were no immediate questions. Just a respectful silence, a space for him to process everything without pressure. Then, finally, Lucas spoke. He told everything. No filters, no cuts. From the moment he suspected, the nights he tried to convince himself he was imagining things, to the brutal discovery and outcome of that night. The friend listened without interrupting, just nodding from time to time. When Lucas finished, he sat back in his chair, draining the glass in one long drink. The friend crossed his arms on the table, taking a deep breath before speaking. And now? Lucas shook his head, laughing humorlessly. Now. I move on. The other frowned. That doesn't answer anything. Move on to where? Lucas looked towards the back of the bar, where some people were talking without worries. I don't know. I just know it's not where I was going before. The friend nodded, taking the glass and turning it on the table. What about her? Are you just going to leave her there, wallowing in her own misery? Lucas narrowed his eyes, looking at him. She chose this. His friend laughed quietly, a laugh filled with something that Lucas didn't immediately understand. That doesn't mean she expected it. Lucas didn't respond. The night continued, the conversations changed direction, but the truth remained there, hanging between them. Lucas knew Emily was broken, that she had lost everything, but part of him wondered if it really mattered. He no longer had responsibilities to her. It wasn't his mission to rescue her from the hole she dug herself. But then, why did I feel this restlessness? Hours later, when he left the bar, the early morning air hit his face like a cold reminder of his new reality. He no longer had a home. Not in the sense of a ceiling, but in the sense of belonging. His home had been destroyed. He got into the car and drove aimlessly again, until he found himself parked in front of a small roadside hotel. Nothing fancy, but enough for what I needed. Upon entering the room, he threw his suitcase on the floor and threw himself on the bed without thinking about anything else. Fatigue 1. The next morning, he was awakened by a strange sensation. Something between relief and uncertainty. The first thing he did was check his cell phone. No message from Emily. No connection. Did he expect it? No. But something inside him wanted to know if she would try again, if she would say something different, if she would fight for something that was already lost. Nothing. He got up, took a long shower, put on clean clothes and left. The day was different. He felt different. Because, for the first time in a long time, he knew the control was completely in his hands. Lucas moved on, but not abruptly. Life does not change overnight, nor do wounds heal the moment the pain becomes bearable. He didn't wake up in a new reality where everything was resolved. What happened between him and Emily still weighed heavily, but over time, the weight stopped being unbearable. Weeks passed, and he began to rebuild a new routine, a new purpose. He got a temporary apartment, a small place with no memories embedded in the walls, where he finally felt alone in a way that wasn't oppressive but freeing. He came home from work without having to pretend that everything was fine, without having to force a smile or deal with a presence that no longer belonged to him. For the first time, he experienced silence not as an enemy, but as a space where he could find himself again. Emily, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. After Lucas left, her life became a maze of regret and despair. The lover disappeared completely, as if he had never existed. The friends who previously supported her began to move away. The job, which was no longer hers, meant she had nowhere to run, no stability, no plan B. She tried to contact Lucas a few times, but her messages remained unanswered. She didn't know what she wanted when she tried to talk to him. Sorry. A second chance. Some form of redemption. Nothing seemed to be enough. With each passing day, the guilt became more unbearable. She realized that, in the end, she had betrayed the only person who really cared about her, and the worst thing of all was knowing that he would never come back. Lucas, for his part, never felt the need to look back. He wasn't looking for information about Emily, he wasn't looking to find out how she was dealing with everything. For him, that was no longer his responsibility. But fate has a cruel way of putting certain things in front of us, even when we don't want them to. One night, when leaving a restaurant, he saw her. Sitting alone on a bench in the square, with a lost look, holding a cold cup of coffee between her fingers. She was haggard, pale, her hair was tied up in an awkward way, her clothes were disheveled. She didn't see him right away, but when her eyes finally met his, a heavy silence fell between them. For a moment, neither of them moved. He could just move on, continue on his way and pretend he didn't see her. But something made him stop. He walked towards her, taking his time, and when he stopped in front of her, she finally spoke. "You look fine." His voice was weak, lifeless. Lucas didn't respond right away. He just watched her, and it was at that moment that he realized how much Emily had changed. The woman who previously exuded confidence, who walked with a sparkle in her eyes, was now just a shadow of what she once was. There was no longer that air of superiority, that confidence of someone who thought they would always have an alternative. Now, there was only someone broken. "I am." His answer was simple, but it carried everything that needed to be said. She smiled, but it was a joyless smile, a smile of someone who finally understood what she had lost. "I screwed up, didn't I?" Lucas sighed, feeling a strange lightness as he realized that, for the first time, he no longer felt anything. Not anger, not resentment, not any desire for revenge. "Yes, Emily. You ruined it." She looked down, nodding slowly, as if she already knew that before she even heard the answer. He didn't want to prolong that conversation. There was nothing more to say. Emily already knew what she needed to know. And Lucas? He was finally ready to move on without carrying any trace of that past with him. "He takes care of himself," was all he said before turning and walking away. This time, Emily didn't try to stop him. The past was resolved. The future belonged to him alone. "Now that you've come this far, I want to know, what did you think of this story? Was the ending satisfactory? Comment your opinion and share your reflections. And if you're not yet subscribed, subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this. Remember, betrayal is never justifiable. Consequences always arrive. Until next time.